What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is our July Instagram Q&A. We try to do this about once per month. Sometimes it ends up being every other month. Bryan and I will put up a question box on our stories and take in questions from our Instagram followers. And then we will compile the best ones and put together a pretty robust and comprehensive podcast episode answering questions with a ton of context and nuance like we like to do. Before we get into today's Q&A, Bryan has some updates for himself and a little bit of a teaser for next week's episode. Bryan, kick us off.
Yeah, next week we have our buddy Cassim Hansen back on the show again. And I'm really excited about this episode because he kind of actually came to me and said, hey, do you want to do an episode on the current state of research regarding muscle length? And I was like, yeah, that's like 100% exactly what I want to do, of course. So basically, Cass is going to go over some of the nuance around training at long and short muscle lengths. Like, it kind of seems like the industry and we, as part of that, have swung so far in the direction of long muscle lengths. And I think that in some ways, Cass has some good information that can maybe help us understand the benefits of using more short overloaded movements, especially kind of in the face of some of the stuff that Paul Carter's been putting out. And I know I've received a lot of DMs with like links to Paul Carter's stuff being like, look, the triceps and biceps and glutes all respond better to short overload. And they're not like responsive to stretch mediated hypertrophy and all this stuff. And I have my thoughts on it, but I'm really curious to have Cass come on so that we can get some of his thoughts on it as well.
I have some thoughts as well that I am excited to talk about with that next week. And some of them were revelations from my training today, which I'll touch on a little bit in my updates.
Nice. I can't wait. Cool. Well, quickly on my updates, because we have a bunch of questions to get to, but poor night of sleep last night for me, which is unfortunate. Bryson had a bad dream around 2 a.m. and I couldn't fall back asleep till 4. And then my alarm goes off at 5 for this podcast. So one of those kind of nights. However, I'm really glad I took Monday off of training yesterday. And it was kind of up in the air. Like, I had trained shoulders on Sunday, so I was planning on doing legs on Monday as they, were supposed to be recovered. But I woke up and just didn't really feel it. My legs were still kind of sore. And one of the things I discussed on our last episode was compensation injuries around my ruptured plantar fascia. So my opposite leg, the one that I've basically been putting all of my weight on as I limp around every day for the last 3 weeks, it's been bothering me a lot. I think it started like a week and a half or 2 ago where it just got like really tight and I couldn't like fully flex my leg. So I was kind of hesitant to want to do a bunch of really hard, deep quad training when there kind of feels like it's swollen back there when I go down super far. So I just took a guess yesterday in the morning when I woke up. I was like, man, I wonder if this is my IT band. Like, it just, I'm constantly putting the weight on that foot. The IT band can cause a lot of the similar symptoms that I'm feeling. And so I spent the whole day while I was working basically grinding out my IT band with this massive ball that I have. It's like bigger than a lacrosse ball, so it works pretty well for something like that. And this morning I woke up and it's like 50-60% better. So I think I maybe nailed it with the IT band. And so I'm going to train today, see how it goes. One thing I'm actually changing in my training is I think now that I'm in a surplus, I'm taking out the hack press that I had discussed in prior episodes as a replacement for the pendulum. And I'm going to go back to the pendulum. And I want to try it this time using the prime wedges. But I think that using the prime wedges is going to force my feet to go too low. And so I don't know if I'm going to be able to go all the way to ass to grass type thing in the pendulum. I don't know if you've seen Berto do them at all in his stories, but he basically just goes to parallel where like his knees flex forward as far as they can go and comes back up. So I'm thinking with the prime wedges on my pendulum, that might be the case for me as well. But I have no idea. So today is going to be an experiment with that. And I'm excited about that. The new split overall has been really awesome. Changing it into a 5-way split instead of a 4-way split. However, I think I'm going to need to do it over 8 days. I was thinking that by splitting up the 4th day into halves and doing 5 days that I'd be able to do it over 7 days, but I just don't like training that 5 days a week. It's just a little bit too much for me, and 4 days or 5 out of 8 seems to fit me much better. And then to touch on body weight stuff real quick, I am always amazed, especially this year, how adaptive my metabolism is, both directions, but even more so going back up. And so to provide context, like when I was on my way down in this diet, to get even into the like mid to upper 180s, I was 24, 25, 2,600 calories. And then to get below mid 180s, I was like 22, 23-ish calorie, 2,300 calories. And now I've been every day for the entire week, I've been basically between 187 and 188. And I'm eating between 3,500 and 4,000 calories every day. And it just like boggles my mind that I can be eating that's over 1,000 calories more on the way back up than I was on the way down. And I don't know, man, that just feels like it's larger than the adaptation that most people experience going up, but I could be wrong. Do you have any kind of insight on that?
I mean, my initial thought is tracking accuracy at those higher intakes because at 4,000 calories per day and then especially coupled on the back of what happened on once the diet was over. If you just ran those numbers, it seems unlikely to me. It could be like maybe an entry that's just incorrect in one of the apps. That's generally one of the biggest
I don't use
things.
apps. I track everything by hand.
Okay. So where are some of those sources are my next questions. How are you hitting 4,000 calories? Like, is fat super high? I don't think you're doing.
Yeah, I'm eating a bunch of brownies every night for the most part.
Okay. And are those
so like if I make a batch of brownies, it's like 4,000 calories for the batch, and then I'll eat like a quarter of it.
Understood.
So I'm pretty confident that it's like around 1,000 calories, and then that's like after dinner where I'm at around 3,000 calories. It's certainly ambiguous. Like that's why I said I'm between 3,500 and 4,000 calories. Like I don't exactly know what the number is. I just know that it's not 3,000 and it's certainly more than that. So whatever, like I just think it's interesting, and it could also be a result of the fact that for a week and a half or two, I was eating 5,000 calories. And so now 4,000 to my body, it's like, oh, well, this is a diet essentially, like at least for the moment. And then maybe a week from now, everything figures itself out again and the scale starts climbing, So it's just a weird maybe hiatus in the system or something along those lines. But
one thing that I have found is I always want to be very cautious when I say this, but like the leaner you are and the longer you have played the game, the more you can get away with. Because when you really zoom out over that time horizon, like you have been incredibly focused, health, quality food focused over years and years and years and years. And that is like your metabolism and body's baseline. And like you can go on these, what was the term from like 2 weeks ago? Planned hedonistic deviations. Was that it?
Yep, exactly. Okay. PhD, baby.
So you could go to Vegas and treat your body like an absolute dumpster fire for 4 days. You come home for 5 days, you're back on your shit. And it's like, besides maybe some like energy and dehydration, it's like you never went sort of thing. But if someone who's just like been doing this for like 4 or 5 months goes and does that, like you're not going to bounce back like someone who's been like in your position would. So that is like what I'm leaning to. And I know that to be true of myself. I just generally don't do that because I feel so terrible afterwards. But
yeah, I don't, which is so weird. That's like been the hardest part for me, is because I keep eating this stuff and then expecting to wake up and being like, oh, I feel awful. Like I wish I hadn't eaten that, but I wake up feeling great and like ready to go. So then like, I'll commit and like, I'm like, today I'm going to stop eating the brownies, and then nighttime will come and I'm like, hey, what's the drawback? I'm just going to eat the brownies.
Yeah.
So I feel a little bad about it. Like I feel like at this point, 3 weeks post diet, I should be cleaning myself up a little bit, but it's almost it's interesting to me as an experiment to see what I can get away with, and it's definitely not something I'm gonna continue throughout the off season. But I think it's interesting for what it is. Real quickly, just to finish up my last two updates. Very rarely in my life these days, with 25 years experience, do I hear something on a podcast from somebody that isn't like a PhD scientist, that, or like someone, like John Meadows, who's just an extremely intelligent veteran of the game. But I was listening to this French YouTuber on Abel's podcast the other day. His name is Natural Hypertrophy. And I was listening to him talk about a bunch of things that I don't agree with. And then one thing that was a really interesting idea regarding ab training. And so he was like, just superset your ab work or alternate it, however you want to approach that, with your like lower fatiguing upper body movements. And in my brain, I was like, yeah, like why wouldn't I do that? Like saving it for the end, I end up skipping it 80% of the time, I'd say. Like I might train abs once every 4 weeks or something in a blue moon. But imagine, like, I'm not talking about doing it supersetted with free weight barbell upper body movements that would require core stability. So I'm not talking about like bent over dumbbell rows or like overhead press, like standing or something like that. But if you have a chest supported movement, or you're doing like a lying down pressing movement or a lateral raise or something like that, there's really no reason you can't do a set and then, take a couple breaths and do some abs and come back and do another set of lateral raises. So, yeah, I thought it was an interesting idea, and it's something I'm going to potentially experiment with just as a way to maybe keep me on track training my abs. And then the final thought I have in my updates is since my foot is since I ruptured it 3 weeks ago, I haven't been able to walk like, at any pace worth mentioning. I think I'm walking at like a 2.0 pace right now as I kind of hobble around, and it's just not comfortable to walk. So I don't go for walks. I walk as minimally as I can, as needed to get through life. And so what I've been doing instead is biking a lot. And the thing with biking is that it's not as low intensity as walking. Even if you're going, like, when you're outside, you have to deal with hills and there's undulations and I really hate biking on a low turnover rate where you're just, super fast the whole time with your legs. I like to put the bike on the hardest pedal amount. So it's kind of almost like a laborious grind to like turn the wheels each time. So my heart rate gets at a minimum to the 100, say, and then on the higher end, if I'm going up a hill, it can get to like 150, 160. And so I've been doing this 1 or 2 times a day for 20 minutes instead of going for walks. And I'm like truly enjoying it. There's something about getting my heart rate elevated in this fashion that is different than doing it from doing like a hard set of pendulum. And it's definitely different than doing, just going out and taking a walk. And, yeah, I'm in the first few weeks, the infantile stage of kind of adding cardio back into my life. But so far, so good. And as I always say, I think the best time to do cardio is when you're in a surplus, because you actually have the glycogen and the fuel to support it. So, yeah, I'm going to continue, I think, doing this even after my foot heals and kind of see how it facilitates my conditioning throughout the off season.
I love that. There's something that I've been thinking about a little bit as well of adding it in, just because it's like, we're getting older, Bryan, you know what I mean? And like, I don't do anything but lift weights, you know what I mean? And it's like, I should add it in there just from like a hedging my bet sort of thing for like zone 2 type stuff. Maybe like 20. Well, let's be real. We're going to start at like 10 minutes, maybe push to like 15 on a Stairmaster, maybe like twice per week or something like that. Or the bike. I love riding the bike. I generally will ride it as like a warm up for leg days. But it is something that there was a period where I was adding in like 2 hit sessions, like very short, like Tabata on the bike, right? On like the Airdyne. I did like that. It's like fast enough to where I will actually do it. It's fucking 4 minutes, right? But yeah, I definitely do kind of agree with that, just from like just checking, like crossing your T's and dotting your I's sort of thing.
Yeah, I can't even imagine doing the stationary bike. That's one of my least favorite ways to cardio.
It.
Like, I actually think stationary bike is less preferable to me than treadmill.
Oh, it's probably the top one. If I was to buy like, if I could only buy like one piece of gym equipment, I would buy the stationary, like the spin bike.
But like I'm talking about in comparison to like being out on my bike and actually like riding my bike around instead of sitting on a bike and in a gym with I don't know. It's just like you have the option to be out in nature. It's like the equivalent between treadmill and running, but I'm trying to make like running outside, versus running on a treadmill. But for some reason, like the bike to me is even more mundane than the treadmill.
Yeah, okay, I could see that.
But you can like it. That's fine. You're allowed to like it.
I kind of think I fell in love with it between my injuries. Like when I had the Achilles rupture, I could ride the Airdyne, and then when I had my patella repaired, riding the bike was like the only, like once I could set the seat, I'm trying to think, the seat super high so my knee never bent like too far, and I was able to like get movement in again. And then that's what I did to rehab my patella like a lot, was I just rode the bike, and as my range of motion improved, I would like move the seat down. So I think like between those things, I just really grew to like it because it was like, it allowed me to move when I, whatever, soon after those surgeries.
Yeah, and with your nomadic lifestyle, like I'm sure you don't even own like a regular bike or it's in storage somewhere.
I do not own a bike.
Yeah.
Jenny owns one, but she's never seen it. And it took 2 years to get shipped, and it's in Virginia, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would be easy for you to rent one in Bali too, but like,
there's nowhere to ride.
Like everyone has their thing.
The roads are small. They're packed with scooters and cars and stuff. There's not really anywhere to ride it. So I ride the stationary bike at the gym. Happy as shit.
Cool. Perfect. All right, let's hear what's going on with you, dude.
So I am into my second week on the hypertrophy block, and I am really, really enjoying it. Like the metabolic phase kind of put things into perspective. Like my strength block was still hypertrophy-esque. I was still like reps between 4 and 8. So it was a lot of the same movements and stuff. I did have like deadlifts in, but other than that, it was a lot of like similar hypertrophy movements, just at lower rep ranges. But it's just like, I forgot how much it's been 2 months, essentially, a little over.
Yeah.
So it's been fun just getting back in and hitting like sets of like 10, taking them to failure for the most part is fun. And I've just been really, really enjoying it. And then from a body weight standpoint, this is the first time with a calorie. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in with some questions on your training real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
What's your split, and do you have any idea how many sets per muscle group per week you're doing at this point?
Yeah, so we do a anterior focused day, so like chest, anterior delts, triceps, and then that's Monday. Then we have a lower, which is hack squat, dumbbell, bent knee RDL, leg extension, leg curl with some abs. And then I have an off day, and then I have a posterior focused upper day, then another lower, and then an entire upper focused day where it's like one exercise of every muscle group on the upper body.
Oh, cool. I like that. So upper, lower. Well, it's push lower, pull lower, full upper.
Yes. Sorry, no.
Yeah.
Push upper, pull upper, then like an upper with the lowers in between.
No. Yeah, I know. I'm saying it's a push day for upper, then a lower day.
Yes.
Then a pull day for upper, then a lower day, then a full upper body day. Yeah. No, we were saying the same thing. I think we were just saying it differently.
Yeah, I like it. I do not know how much per each one. And that's kind of, I did have a note here that maybe wanted to talk about more next week, but it's something that I've been like really, really thinking about as I've been trying to, like with anything, when I have things that I disagree with or questions with, I always start with myself. And the whole like, I was actually talking to Jenny about it today, but I have like this really big evolving like question in my mind around like training to failure, especially on like lengthened type movements and how people like quantify things. For example, on my final set of the hack squat, supposed to be taken to failure, right? A set to failure on the hack squat absolutely buries me. I get nauseous. I have to like sit there for like 15 seconds afterwards and like collect myself. It just requires so much of me. And it's just like when I see in programs and stuff when people are like, oh, we took 3 sets to failure on the leg, on like the leg press. And I'm like, at 70% of 1 rep max or whatever in like a study. I'm like, no, the fuck you
You're
didn't.
doing like 20 reps,
Yeah.
right? 25 reps
Yeah.
to failure.
Yeah. And it's just hard for me to like relate to that because I'm just like, what is to failure? And like today I cut it at 9 reps and here's the reason why. I'm on the hack squat. I pull the stop pins out so I can get full range of motion. And on my 9th rep, like my core brace like broke down a little bit. I could like feel that. And I'm like, okay, well, if I take this 10th rep to failure, and I'm like doing all these check downs in my mind really quick. I'm like, I took the stops out so I can go as deep as I want. But if this pins me, it's like going to pin my fucking knees into my chest and I'm going to be fucked.
Yeah.
There's 2 other people in that side of the gym and they're both girls doing like booty band workouts. I'm like, they're fucking worthless if I need help here. So I was like, okay, I'm racking it.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't want to.
Well, I mean, you would call that like a 0 to 1 RIR. So you like, you may have had another rep, but like you were close enough. Like you were within the proximity.
That's exactly what I wrote it down as. So that's a 0 to 1. I may have had another rep, but I may have died trying to get it. And
I don't often fail when I don't intend to fail. Like I would say my default is to take things to 0 to 1 RIR unless like I'm in the point of my cycle where I'm going into like partials and stuff like that. And then, the purpose is to do that. But yeah, if I'm like on a movement like that where there are no partials, like a lengthened movement, 0 to 1 RIR is as far as it goes. Like I maybe once a cycle I'll fail like a leg, a hack or a pendulum or something like that, but it's very rare.
And that's kind of how I generally approach it too. Like I learned my lesson taking RDLs to a 0 RIR. So like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to cut them. It's generally like lower body stuff, but obviously like a shortened range movement or even something that's like safer, like a seated leg curl is generally a more like lengthened hamstring, but you fail it. It's just like, whatever, you're good sort of thing. But upper body stuff, even like a dumbbell bench press or whatever. If you fail, you just kind of dump them off to the side. Aside from like barbell bench press and hack squat and deadlift type things, I feel like a lot of things can be much more safely taken to failure.
Yep. All right, cool. Continue on.
And a little bit about body composition stuff. It's been interesting, like not modifying nutrition and really just letting training and time make the body composition changes. They're slower, but it has been interesting to see because it's obviously something that I'm generally just going to pull the nutrition lever because it's much faster and easier to facilitate. So that's just been interesting to finally like do it a different way that I normally otherwise wouldn't. And then the last thing I had, which I get, especially with new clients, questions around like, hey, how should I I have an Apple Watch, a Garmin or whatever for, managing my activity and stuff. One of the like cardinal sins is like or adding back the calories that your like calorie tracker said you burned. And while I think they're like for tracking steps are fine, and maybe if you're a more like endurance style athlete can be more beneficial. But after that hack squat set, that 1 to failure that I was just talking about, where I was like a mess and like, needed to collect myself, I was like walking to the other side of the gym to start my next exercise. My Garmin sent me a notification. It's like, it's time to get up and be active. And I was like, oh, you can get fucked.
You've been sitting too long in this hack squat. You got to stand now.
like I literally just took a set to death and you're telling me to get up and be active. Okay. I'm questioning like how this thing is built for sure.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But that's it for me.
Mine does that sometimes too. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Should we do some questions here?
Hell yeah.
All right, cool. So actually, I think I'm going to kick this first one over to you, even though it would normally come to me because you just finished one. So I think you'll have some insight on how to design a strength phase to support hypertrophy.
Yeah, so it was a first for me because I think kind of collectively we like to really separate the two of like, if you're doing a strength phase, that means you need to barbell back squat, you need to deadlift, and you need to be doing like barbell movements, but you really don't like have to. And what I liked about how Alex designed it for me was we took pretty much a lot of the same hypertrophy style movements, but we just did lower reps. And it was fun really getting to like push like a dumbbell bench press for like sets of 4 and just see like, hey, can I move the like 115s with this? It was actually fun to try and be like strong again, but with those hypertrophy style movements. So that is a way you can do it so that you're not like relearning new movement patterns or completely changing your training. And really the goal is to just take enough time away from the like, rep ranges of traditional, more, I'm using air quotes here, traditional hypertrophy in the like 10 to 12, 8 to 12, something sort of rep range, and just train a different stimulus a little bit more, because we can have hypertrophy across, what we know, I think even as low as like 3 to 5 reps, right? And it just kind of covering your gaps a little bit and resensitizing to some certain rep ranges.
Yeah, very well said. I love all of that. The key word I think here is that this person is asking about a strength phase to support hypertrophy, not just a strength phase. And so it's very much along the lines of what you said. Like, it actually wouldn't even make any sense for you to be like, well, I usually do a pendulum and an RDL, but fuck it, we're doing strength work, so I'm going conventional deadlift and back squat. Like where's the carryover? At that point, you're just like having to learn a new movement that's inherently quite complicated, and it may have transfer over to your hypertrophy work, but like, what's the cost? How many weeks do you have to put in to like really get past those neural adaptations in the back squat and the conventional deadlift, when what you're actually trying to do is build strength and a neural efficiency in the RDL and the pendulum, or whatever the same movements were that you would tend to do in your hypertrophy phase. So much like you said, I think it's a factor of lowering reps. That 4 to 6 rep range is perfect if you're doing pendulums, RDLs, dumbbell bench presses, things like that. I wouldn't want to go any below 4. And then I like the way that you had mentioned Alex structured that, where it was like 6-6-4-4 or something along those lines, where you're increasing weight each set. So maybe it's like RPE 6, 7, 8, 9 or something along those lines. And taking longer rest periods, slightly lower volumes. I think the key when looking at the strength phase to support hypertrophy is that you're trying to increase neural adaptation. So you're trying to get better at performing the movements at heavier weights. And then you also, like you said, the word resensitize, or you want to like create or decrease anabolic resistance to the higher rep ranges. So by doing the lower rep sets with the longer rest periods, etc., that's exactly what you're doing. And it's kind of a way to do this in place of a deload, which would also accomplish the same thing of resensitizing you to the hypertrophy stuff. However, this also potentially could have a tangential benefit of increasing neural efficiency.
Very, very well said.
Cool. This next one is really funny. Best way to eat a kiwi.
Here we go. We take a knife and we cut it in half, and then you just eat the 2 sides, and then you just don't eat the little butthole part. But other than that, that's what I'm going with. No spoon or scooping. I'm eating the skin.
Yeah, I cut and scoop, along with 77% of the other people that took my poll. So
what's really funny is, real quick before we move on, you're the whole reason I started eating kiwis. I was like, man, Bryan really loves kiwis. I just like saw him at the grocery store one day, and I was like, Bryan eats them, I'm eating them. It never crossed my mind to not eat the skin. So
yeah, I kind of wish I was introduced to them that way. So I was a super protected little child, and my mother would not even scoop them. She would actually hand peel them and then cut them into biteable slices for me. And so I just grew up not eating it, and it's been one of those things. But so while that may be a negative and I'm getting less nutrients from the skin, one positive in the way that I was brought up is my mother also never let us have any soda growing up, ever. And to this day, I don't like carbonated drinks. Like beer I drink because I've kind of developed a taste for it, but I wouldn't say that I like search out beer and I'm like, beer. But like I literally, I don't drink soda. I don't think I've ever had a soda once in my entire life. I've had like a sip and been like, that's disgusting type thing. So there's just some things where this benefited me, and others where now I'm eating less nutrients from my kiwi. So that was a funny question from our director of operations at Paragon, Laura.
Cool. Let's kick this one over to you. I have some thoughts on it and some questions, but we'll have you start. How would you fuel and plan around hiking a 14er? So that's basically going to be a mountain that is 14,000 feet or above in elevation or peak elevation.
So she's saying that the hike itself is 5 to 9 miles and there's going to be 3,000 feet of elevation. And then it says no sleep. I'm actually curious about that last no sleep comment, because my guess is that it's not actually no sleep, that it's just less sleep, because I think the idea is that you wake up at like 3 or 4 a.m. and drive to the mountain from there. So like theoretically you could still get like 5 hours of sleep or something like that. So I'm going to assume that it's like less sleep and not no sleep. But the way that I would fuel this is I would have a massive meal the night before with a ton of carbs.
Pasta.
And then I would pack my backpack for the hike with my standard whey Gatorade protein drink, make sure I have like some quick sugars from the Gatorade, some protein for more sustainable energy there. I'll bring a bar or two. I usually bring an apple and a banana. And I probably for a hike this long would bring something more substantial, like an actual, like maybe turkey sandwich or something where you actually get some like meat protein and some bread and something a little longer to digest than liquid food or bars or something along those lines. Make sure to have a ton of water. I would have some element electrolyte drink with me as well. And, I think that would probably cover most of my bases. I'm sure you'll have additional thoughts on that though.
Yeah, what's really interesting is I generally find that you and I, Bryan, like I'm obviously going to be the more like slightly cleaner style of eating-esque type person, and you're like, we'll bake brownies and eat brownies or whatever. In this context, we're like switching sides. So like I was going to say like I would fuel this with just like carbohydrate and fat. Pretty much. Like I would bring a little bit of protein, maybe like a protein shake, but something like I want to have options in case something bad happens where like energy depletes and you're running out of like glycogen stores or something like that. So you don't want all like rehydrated type stuff. Like I would probably pack a sleeve of rice cakes. I would also bring some candy for like really, really quick sugar things, because you don't want to be carrying a lot of weight either in something like this. Definitely the electrolytes. You want a big meal the night before. Like pasta is generally going to be the easiest to get the most carbohydrate in for, the least amount of volume sort of thing. And then like some nuts, seeds, different things with some like dried fruits. Again, getting some fructose in. You want some glucose in, packing like Gatorade, things like that. But yeah, I would generally err for like more non-quality carbohydrates that are just going to get in really, really fast, because it's something like that at elevation, right? You're going to be way above that lactic threshold. Your heart rate's going to be pounding as you get up in that elevation, and you're going to be pretty much burning carbohydrate exclusively until you hopefully do not run out. But yeah, you basically just throw carbs at the problem is what I would recommend.
What about the idea of like, you don't want to miss an opportunity to spike MPS no matter what your situation is, especially if you're in like a super catabolic state like that. Like that's more where my thought was going. Like if I have like some whey Gatorade, in the beginning of the hike, maybe even pound it in the car on the way there. And then I have like, a Quest bar or something for 2 or 3 hours in to make sure that I get another bolus of protein type thing. Like I think for the most part, 100% agree with you that it's the carbs that are going to fuel you with the quick energy, but I still would want to make sure to be getting those MPS boluses.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, you can have some to like help you prevent catabolism, but it's hard to get that amount of protein in of things that are like on your back. Like maybe 2 protein bars could be helpful as well. That might be one of the times that I would recommend protein bars. The thing you want to be careful with is eating a bunch of different foods that you don't normally eat because of digestive stuff, especially out on a mountain. You don't want to have diarrhea with all your friends around and you're just shitting on the side of a mountain, especially once you get above the tree line and there's nowhere to fucking hide. So it's a safety kind of thing there I would come from.
Yeah, I always eat bars, so there you go. I wouldn't have no problem eating bars. Cool. All right. This is an interesting question, but also extremely narrow. But what is better for hypertrophy, dumbbells or cables? How about both?
How about both? Yeah. So for more peripheral tissues, I would say we're generally going to use a little bit more cables, which I know Bryan and I generally agree on: biceps, triceps, lateral delts, rear delts, maybe some anterior delts as well. And as you move closer to your larger tissues, maybe lean a little bit more of dumbbells just for loadability, I would say, for certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously, certain things like back, cables are going to be fantastic for your different pull, unilateral pulls and pull arounds and things like that. But I would say as
Yeah.
you lean towards your like smaller muscle groups that are generally further away from like your center line of body, maybe a little bit more cables. But then as you move in, a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's actually like a really interesting way of looking at it because I agree. I just probably would have said it a little bit differently, but I think that the way you said that was awesome. I do think that in general, cables are probably just as effective, even for the torso, as dumbbells. So when you're talking about like back and chest, I think you could dumbbells or cables. Dumbbells are going to get you more of that lengthened overload for your chest, whereas the cables are going to be a little more even slash short. Um, and then for back, like you're going to be short overloaded whether you choose dumbbells or cables. And I think that cables allow you to line things up a little bit better. But I mean, I think the answer for upper body is a mix of both. Maybe skewed slightly more toward cables for the reason you mentioned, that you just have more of this like periphery over here. As far as legs, like I think neither of them are super effective. So, I mean, if I had to choose, it would 100% be dumbbells because you can do a lot more with dumbbells. I've seen people rig up cables for like split squats and RDLs. I've done RDLs with cables, but the loadability, like you said, is just not great. And it's always pulling you from like a bit forward. So when you're setting up a cable RDL, you're hinging and it's pulling you away from your body, which does increase the moment arm, but it also makes stability a little bit harder. Um, so yeah, I think that would probably be our answer. I think we covered that pretty well.
Yeah, and it really depends on like what you have access to as well. That's another thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's with a little bit more context, we could have went a little deeper there for sure. This next one I'm really, really interested to talk about.
Let me kick it over to you real quick. How long have you been coaching for?
Me, full time,
Yeah.
about 3.5 years, and then I had my business on the side for about a year before. But that was like learning.
Cool. So you're still relatively infantile
Yeah.
into the game. But let's have you attack this first, and then I'll jump in with a couple of comments if that's
Yeah,
cool.
of course.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
the question is, how do you avoid burnout as a coach? This person is 12 years into coaching and currently struggling with this. The way I'm going to approach it is really managing your expectations and how you manage your clients coming in. So something that, especially now that I have a service, which is basically like a coaching mentorship for newer coaches in the space and helping them on their like, it's basically what I call my coaching capabilities container. But what I see is a lot of people do not manage their business like another business. Like a check-in could come in on Monday. That same client's check-in could also come on like Saturday, and you're just responding like whenever they come in. Whereas I really don't know why, but I just had this idea that like I'm going to run a professional coaching business. Everyone is going to have check-in due dates. And if your check-in day is Monday and you submit your check-in on Thursday, like you don't get a response until your check-in day. Like we have an agreement. We're all adults here. We operate as such. And what I've seen is the people who are kind of getting into burnout, like they don't have these boundaries set, right? They don't have working hours. If a client messages them at Saturday night at 9 p.m., they're, think they have to respond and those sorts of things. And I think it's like at the end of the day, like you have to fill your cup first so that yours is full for you to, spill over into others, and really managing those expectations, setting boundaries for yourself, making sure that you're taking care and prioritizing yourself so that you can show up in the best meaningful way for your clients. And that's the way I phrase it, is like we have check-in days so that I have time carved out so that I can dedicate to best helping you. If you submit your check-in on Thursday when, Mike, Jason, and John are supposed to get it, it's not fair to them that you couldn't hold up your end of the agreement, sort of thing. So I think really making sure that you're managing expectations on the front end is the biggest thing that I generally see. And then the last part I will add there is like, as you've been coaching for 12 years, this is more of a question. How has things shifted? Are you serving a population of client that you no longer really resonate with? There's a reason why I personally don't coach busy moms of three and help them get their body back. One, because I have no fucking clue how they're supposed to do that because I can't relate. And that's not from being a dick. It's like, I just don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a busy mom of three, you know? So in theory, on paper, I can help them, but I cannot relate sort of thing. And the question there is like, as these 12 years have gone by, have you maybe found yourself serving a majority of a population that you don't really relate to or engage to, and it's purely transactional? So that part is more of a question.
Yeah, that was actually exactly how I was going to start, is what type of client are you working with? Maybe like a super needy population where, you find yourself almost acting more psychologist than coach. And for sure, being a coach is a mix of both, without a doubt. It's a bit of psychologist and a bit of coaching. But when it starts skewing more and more and more to being like, I don't want to say emotional punching bag, because I doubt that they're treating you like your kids would treat you, but maybe more that you're having to absorb a lot of their emotional stress. That could be really, really hard. And so it may just start with you being able to dictate more about what type of client you decide to work with. And you may not be in a position where you can do that, but if you are, 12 years in, you'd think you'd have your business relatively established, and maybe you are able to be a little bit more selective. Maybe you can raise your rates, and that would narrow down the amount of people that would want to work with you. And then you feel like you're getting more for your time. So maybe it becomes more worthwhile of an opportunity cost in your brain. You can also look into potentially doing group coaching like Aaron does, because I think that, not that group coaching attenuates the emotional neediness of your clients necessarily, but it does kind of clump them to these group atmospheres. I'm not exactly sure how if I'm saying this right, but you're addressing your group at once, as opposed to always communicating with this person one-on-one, even though I'm sure there is some one-on-one time too. But maybe the other people in the group are able to then kind of almost help coach as well. Like they can kind of drop some of their personal experiences that maybe this person can relate to, and suddenly some of that emotional need drops off of you. So that would be one thought. And then another one, like for me, given that I am at this point 13 years in, I guess we probably both started this around the same time. I have reinvented the way that I feel about training and programming, or it's meandered its way into something that looks completely different now than it did 13 years ago. And so I don't know your situation. Like, I don't know if you are, say, in the CrossFit space and you've just been in the CrossFit space for 12 years. Like, that would drive me crazy. I don't know if how I would still be doing it if I was still doing CrossFit, because that's not something that I'm as passionate about anymore. So it's possible that maybe your own passions no longer reflect those of what your clients' passions are. So I remember many years ago, I basically stopped coaching CrossFit clients. I have one girl left that I've been with for 8 years, I think 7 or 8 years. And we started as CrossFitters. She was a competitive CrossFitter. And then we started more like evolving into like more of a hybrid method. And then we went into more of a pure bodybuilding route. And now we're back to a bit more of like a hybrid approach. So it's kind of meandered a little bit, but I think that identifying in yourself what it is that inspires you, and then trying to take on clients that kind of follow similar inspirational patterns and are interested in that type of design would be helpful.
I love that part you added about the, like, as your life trajectory sort of meanders, a really good term to use there, having that reflect in your business. That is something that I have always really planned to do. I've done it a little bit. I will speak more along the lines of like health and understanding, how to order labs for yourself, and as being like the patriarch of a household and you need to be able to be there for your family. You need to know what your cholesterol markers look like. So like speaking to those things because it's something that I know I will have to move into. So I definitely really, really agree with that. And just making like being inspired from what you're currently doing with your lifestyle and how that fits into your business, I think is a really, really big part of it. Because I couldn't maybe for the super committed like one off, but I couldn't imagine myself at like 43 years old being super jazzed about trying to coach a 19-year-old because he thinks he's going to bang chicks if he gets, bigger arms or something like that. So I think that is a big part of it, is like it actually resonating with your life.
Yeah, for sure. And as I've gotten older, I've attracted more clients that are older too. Like I work with a couple guys now in their 40s, which I'm almost 40, so it seems to make sense.
Definitely. Anything else you want to
add? Okay, cool. This next one I'll attack first. Ratio of lengthened. Sorry, what?
I was just asking if we were done with that question.
Oh, yeah. Ratio of lengthened to shortened per muscle group. So this kind of falls into just the way that I generally feel about these overall. And so most muscle groups, I'm like 70% lengthened, 30% shortened. I think that may skew slightly higher for lower body movements and slightly lower for the peripheral muscles of the upper body, to use the term that you used earlier. So we're talking like arms and shoulders. So you might have more short overloaded movements for those. But yeah, I think in general, like 70-30, 60-40 is a pretty safe, good way of going about that.
Yeah, I think the 60-40 to 70-30 is a great starting point. Obviously, certain muscle groups are going to be a little bit harder than others. Like the two that come to mind are like rear delt, lateral delt. It's largely going to be, shortened overload. Yes. Aside from doing like the cable or wrist height, like dual cable lateral raise, or like lengthened partials dumbbell lateral raise. I can't really think of any one other way that you're really going to train them lengthened. Same thing with back, right? It's going to be overwhelmingly shortened. But for something like, chest, triceps, quad, something like that, having a little bit more of the lengthened is probably going to be the most beneficial for hypertrophy. However, we are going to have an expert tell you, verbatim what to do next week.
Yeah, the back one is interesting because people have been building really good backs for a century. People have had great backs from bent over rowing and doing pull-ups. And both of those are, it's depending on how you execute them, you can get a lot more out of the lengthened position than you probably can with like a pull down, I think. But if you're going to relegate yourself to doing a lot of cable work, which I do for back because I just think it feels better. I like the even resistance curve. I think employing things like, post-failure partials, reverse drop sets, and then even progressing into just heavy ass weight where you can't even get a full rep, and then letting, range of motion drop off. So that's something I've only used so far on hip extension in my last cycle. I ended up I do 3 sets at the end of a cycle, start with 2, work up to 3 at the end of the cycle. And I'll do like 2 kind of normal sets where it just like stops at, 0 or 1 RIR. You're limited by the short position type thing. And then my final set, I'll grab a weight that's really heavy. It won't even allow me to really even complete more than 1 or 2 full reps. And I'll just do like 8 or 10 reps with it and just kind of let that range of motion fall off. And so that will certainly bias more of the lengthened position. And it's something you can institute quite effectively with back movements too. Yep. And then this question, the next one is from the same guy, but it's so I don't know if it's in relation to the prior question. Like if it's the way he phrased it was ratio of lengthened to shortened per muscle group and how do you measure effective reps? And so I don't know if the how do you measure effective reps is in relation to the first part of the question or if it's a like completely separate question itself. What do you think? How
I
would you
think it's probably
interpret
a
that?
separate question.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it was just when you have a question box, the question box is already short. So I'm always surprised to get like two questions in a question box.
Shoot your shot, bro.
So how do you measure effective reps? Well, Chris Beardley, the guy that created effective reps, would say that it's the last 5 reps before failure. But it gets extremely ambiguous, and maybe this is where the guy is going with it. I can't remember how close he follows my stuff, but like when you start going into like partials and reverse drop sets and stuff like that, like then how do you measure effective reps? So that's like one interesting route that you could take it. And then you could also take it from a completely different route and say, maybe effective reps start before 5. Maybe Chris Beardsley, didn't give enough credit to reps 6, 7, and 8. So I don't know how. What do you think? How do you want to attack this?
Man, the only honest answer I could say is I just do not know. I really, really do not know. And because I do not know, what I recommend, what I personally do is I'm going to err on the side of training harder and closer to failure as opposed to not. How I know if I am overdoing it, recovery capacity diminishes. I have noticeably perceived increases in stress. I get other subjective perceptions of increased stress, poor sleep. My desire to train goes down, but I generally err on the side of like, I'm going to err on doing a little bit more as opposed to like not doing enough. And I also think where you are on your training kind of hero's journey or trajectory matters. If you're like a very new intermediate, you probably don't need to train as hard because your margins for gains are still quite large. Once you get to the years of Bryan and myself, like we're scrapping for fucking scraps. Scraps. And I think even periods of like not quite training so hard and stuff, like I will regress. I don't know. I can't say off the top of my head, but some of those studies on like maintaining muscle mass, I don't know if that was like what type we're talking, what peak of person sort of thing. And we've heard this from things like Berto, right? Where he's done worse in shows because he pulled off training intensity. And I don't want to, put words in his mouth, but something along those lines of like getting complacent in that sort of thing. So, I mean, I'm just going to err on the side of like, I'm going to train really hard, close to failure. And if the gas is too much, I just pull off the gas a little bit or increase food, recovery capacity, take an extra rest day, et cetera, et cetera.
I agree. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing and just basically like kind of to add on to that, I wonder if this is maybe reaching a point where you're overthinking too much because we already have hard sets. And so, yeah, it gets a little ambiguous if you're like, well, a hard set could be for RIR or a hard set could be to failure. So why don't we just say like, hey, I'll count a hard set if it feels hard. Like if I have to grind and like really work to complete a rep, put more effort in than I do for the first few reps, then it's probably a quality set that should count. And, I don't even know how I would measure or count effective reps if I'm doing like post failure partials or something like that. I just know that that's a progression that I use. So essentially it's like if I am recovering and I am subjectively, not going backwards, then I can add more. And if I don't, then I don't, then I can't. So it's very ambiguous. It's an interesting question. Maybe it's like something I can ruminate on and we can talk a little bit more about in future episodes. But I do think that for the most part, it's probably beyond what's necessary for you to think about to get results. So yeah, those would be my thoughts on that. I think we should move on.
Yeah. Do you want me to kick this one over to you or do you want me to take it first, this next one?
Sure. I'll take it.
All right. 23% body fat and female. How do we decide to bulk or cut?
What's your goal? I mean, 23% is actually somewhat lean for a female. I mean, it's not very lean, but it's also definitely not lean.
It's leaner than
If we
average for sure.
it's like a 14 or 15% for a guy. So that's like where, I mean, I would say that that's a little lower than where I hang out in the off season, like the end of my off season. It's kind of like the middle of the off season, maybe. Um, it really just depends like what you're comfortable with. I think you could go either direction here. And so if I didn't have anything coming up, like no competitions, no events that I needed to cut for or anything like that, I would just base it on some feedback that your body's giving you. Like, what does your body want to do? Like, do you find yourself hungry or do you find yourself like full a lot? And then also what time of year it is. In the summer, like it helps to cut just because it's hot out, and eating a lot of food makes you hotter. So like if you have no other commitments that are taking you away from it, like I really like the idea of cutting in the summer and bulking in the winter, like put a coat on and stay warm. So that's my simple answer.
Yeah, I would say the first thing I'm going to say is where is this 23% body fat coming from? And how do you want to verify it? That, I think anytime a body fat number comes around, that's the biggest first thing that has to be said, because you might think you're 23% body fat. You could be 19% body fat. That would greatly change the context to this of the answer. You could also be like a 26% body fat, which would really, really help there. Generally, when people are asking this, I'm going to say, let's get lean and see how you feel about yourself then. If you get lean and you're like, man, I look like a swimmer and I don't have any muscle, well, then we're going to, put some muscle mass on. The second or last part I will say there is, how easy is it for you to go through a calorie deficit, right? Because the last thing, if dieting is hard for you and you get the food focus is a problem and how it impedes your social life, if these things become a problem and it's harder for you, getting further away from that, and then meaning you're going to have a larger diet in the future, I would probably say get down to where you're going to feel happy with your physique and then reevaluate, as opposed to going in the opposite direction from it first.
Love that. Yeah. So we have 13 minutes left and we have 5 or 6 more questions. So we got to kind of spend like maybe 2 or 3 minutes a question here.
We got to pick the best ones.
Yeah. All right. So this guy, I'm just going to do this one real quick. This guy DM'd me twice. He's a regular listener to the podcast, but he was saying a suggestion for best exercise for the glutes. He has a leg that's 75 or 0.75 inches shorter than his other leg. So he struggles with some of the basic movements. And then he sent me a follow-up and said that he did hacks, leg press, and RDLs tonight and feels like he got quads from the hacks, glutes from the leg press, and a bit of hamstrings and glutes from the RDLs. And he's like, is that good? And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. So I think that this question is really simple because, yeah, hacks are quads. Leg press can certainly be glutes. If you want more glutes out of it, raise your feet up a little bit, because I think he even noted that he went low with his feet. So try raising your feet up a little. You might even get more glute out of that leg press. And then the RDL should be an equal distribution of glute and hamstring. My suggestion initially, before you wrote me the follow-up, was to say, why don't you prioritize more single leg work? So if you have a leg that's shorter than the other leg, then it clearly has to be awkward for you to like squat and do RDLs on both legs. So you could potentially do single leg work, or you could wear a lift and put your feet at equal height. So those would be my quick answers to that.
Yeah, but that one, the thought that I had was like a 45-degree hip extension. Then you could just put a lift in on the shorter one, because you have like less balance isn't really an option there, or a limiting factor. It would be
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Simpler.
So this person listed 3 lengthened overload movements: hack, leg press, and RDL. So a 45-degree hip extension is a great addition to that. Yeah. All right, cool. Aaron, you don't really do a whole lot of programming, but what is the highest we or a client has went with volume for a given body part?
I have a really, really hard time answering this one, because it's how you equate the volume, and like the more I learn, the deeper I go, the less I feel confident saying anything. Because
like it could be like it's 30 sets at 4 RIR or 12 sets at 0 RIR. They're kind of like the same thing. So
man,
yeah.
what I would say is start on the low end And you have to monitor, you want to see what those sets look like. You want to see what a 2 RIR looks like. You want to see what a 1 RIR or a 0 RIR looks like, because I would bet those 1 RIRs or failures are really like a 3 to 4 realistically if you are doing higher volume. Because if not, you're going to fall the fuck apart. You just can't. You can't.
You can't do 30 sets to failure.
Yeah.
So for me, the highest I've ever gone, I've done back over 20 sets a week before. And as far as clients, man, I think I've had female clients over 30 sets for a few muscle groups here and there. But again, like, they're not going to failure. And so, yeah, I think that this 20 to 30 not to failure would be as high as I've seen. And then with sets to failure, I mean, 12 to 15 maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is, when should you either increase weight or increase reps? Any quick thoughts?
Yeah. So the first thing is, like, can you increase weight and stay within a target rep range, right? Let's say you're doing like sets of 8 with a 50-pound dumbbell. If the 60-pound dumbbell is the next dumbbell and your reps go down to like 4, it's probably not in the best, decision to increase the weight. You want to increase reps. One thing I really, really like doing is micro-loading. If you are trying to stay within a target rep range, that's adding like maybe a 2.5-pound plate, maybe a 1-pound plate, half pound, things like that. But I'm generally going to recommend, and what I like to personally follow, is increasing reps within a rep range. When I reach the top end of the rep range, increase weight, which drops me back down to the bottom of the rep range, and repeat.
Yeah, I agree that that's definitely the simplest way for anyone, general population, to implement, like just a standard double progression, hit the top of the rep range, increase the weight, drop the reps, work back up type thing. Me personally, I love the lower end of my rep ranges. Almost any time I program a rep range for myself, I'm just going to hang out in the bottom of that rep range. So for me, I may as well just, I mean, it's like a microcosm of what you're saying, because instead of making my rep range 6 to 10, I could just make my rep range like 5 to 8. And then it would be like the same exact thing. It would just be that I'm trying to hit the top of the rep range instead of the middle of the rep range. But I very rarely try to hit the top of my rep ranges before I increase weight. So I'll hit the middle of the rep range. And once I hit the middle of it, then I'll increase weight, as long as my final set doesn't take me below the rep range. So in the example of like the 6 to 10 rep range, once I can hit 8 on something, I'll usually increase, as long as my second set then doesn't take me below 6. So that's kind of how I look at it. But mostly I like the idea of just trying to match. That's my favorite approach, is not even to worry about increasing reps and just try to match reps with microloading. And microloading is specific to the movement. So when I'm doing my hack press and I'm doing 550 pounds, I can add 5 pounds, and that's less than 1% of an increase. But if I'm doing what's a good example? A leg curl with 110 pounds, then, I might add 1 pound or 1.5 pounds to keep with that same like 1% increase. And I find that I can usually match reps while doing that.
I like that.
Yeah. What do you do for stubborn muscle groups? Could be small or bigger groups. Huge fan of the podcast.
So first of all, thank you for enjoying the podcast. I'm sure Bryan feels the same. The first thing that comes to mind is the muscle group stubborn, or are you just not quite adept yet at performing the movements for that muscle group? Like, we're all going to have some that we have like better propensities to perform well. Like mine from a very young age was like chest. It's just like, oh wow, I can just contract this well, sort of thing. But one that took me literally like over a decade to get good at is quads. And I got my ass kicked on it for a very, very long time. So the first thing is like, learn how to perform the movement like correctly, how you should be, and in the muscle group that you want. That's the first thing. Learn how to better contract it. Select movements that are going to require you to contract the muscle better. For example, If the muscle that is stubborn for you is chest, like a barbell bench press is probably not going to be the greatest for helping you learn how to really contract that, because you're going to be so many compensatory kind of muscles that you can use to still move that barbell sort of thing. So that's the first. And then I would say taking more sets closer to failure. And then if you're still able to recover from that, start adding in a little bit of volume, but make sure that you are training the muscle group or groups that are stubborn from their different divisions, angles, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I like the order that you did too, where volume is like the last piece that you manipulate there. So I think exercise execution and selection are going to be extremely important here, because especially if you're going to be prioritizing a muscle group that may eventually lead to increased intensity and down the road increased volume. You want to be selecting exercises that aren't going to cause you burdensome issues as you're doing it. So like a common thing is, people are like, oh, I want to do a bicep. I need to build my biceps. But then they're doing barbell curls and dumbbell curls, and suddenly they get elbow tendonitis because they're just doing way too many free weight curls. So this is where using a cable station and being able to line up properly with your musculature is going to be much more forgiving to your joints. Super important. And I think that can be extrapolated out across all of the different muscle groups as well, on how specific and refined you can get with your execution. So I love what you said. And yeah, I think manipulating frequency would be an interesting one too, because depending on, if you're going to be doing more movements for a muscle group, then there inherently is probably going to be more short movements. Like anytime I'm doing a prioritization cycle, I like having more short overload movements in there. So maybe it almost becomes like 50-50 or 60-40 in favor of short overload movements, because then that facilitates your ability to increase frequency. So if you're trying to specialize on lateral delts, you could do those 4 days a week, because most of those movements are going to overload you short. And then maybe you have one day in there where you're doing that like dual cable behind the back lateral raise. And then the other 3 days you're doing short overload stuff. And then glutes could be similar, where you have like 2 days a week where you're doing like your squats, your deadlifts, your hinges, your lunges. And then you have 2 or 3 days a week where you're doing like hip thrusts and glute bridges and 45-degree hip extensions and other like short overload movements that aren't going to cause you as much fatigue.
Yeah.
I feel like I was just speaking on 1.5 speed.
You definitely were. The last thing I will say there that you kind of brought up but then didn't cover the point that I wanted to say is, because like if it's a stubborn muscle group for you and you don't feel great performing and contracting it yet, by going with a higher frequency, you're getting like more frequent attempts to learn how to perfect the movement patterns and stuff. And that can be beneficial, as opposed to like, oh, hey, I figured it out. I figured out the leg extension this week. And then you don't do it again for like 8 days. You're going to forget, as opposed to like if you do it again in 3 days or something like that, you're just getting more reps in a more dense period.
Yep, neural efficiency. Cool. So real quick, last question here, and then I actually think maybe you could answer number 14 on your own after I bounce.
I'm just going to ping her on Instagram, and I'll get back to her with it.
And do it individually. Yeah, cool. All right, so the last question then is walking 10 to 12K steps sufficient, or should I do regular cardio too? And I actually think this goes back to our introduction where I was talking about biking. I almost think we answered that question there. So 10 to 12K steps should be good for health. It is consistent. It gives you diagnosis for how many calories you're burning, stuff like that. Cardio can then complicate that a little bit, which is kind of why I love cardio during surpluses and not as much during deficits. But I do think, there's a ton of research out now on like zone 2 and stuff like that. And so if you're walking briskly, you are doing zone 2. But if you walk really slowly, you're probably not doing zone 2. So I think you could add some cardio. I think that if you're going to do it, like I said, to reiterate, I do think you should be at maintenance or in a surplus. If you're going to do cardio in a deficit, it wouldn't be for health benefits. It would be to facilitate caloric deficit.
Pretty much hit the nail on the head. Yeah, I think for your most general type person, 10 to 12,000 steps, most people's quality of life and fitness and stuff, it will improve with daily 10 to 12,000 steps. That is above average. It really depends on how the ambitiousness of your goals, really.
Yep. Yep. Cool. All right. That's all we got. We got them all except one.
Cool. So as always, thanks for listening, guys. Next week, we will have Cass on the podcast to talk lengthened versus shortened and the latest stuff there.